Good morning. Welcome to Windows. It's my pleasure to introduce to you this morning Calenthia Dowdy. Calenthia is Associate Professor of Youth Ministry and Anthropology here at Eastern. You've been here, what, 12 years or so? And she's a beloved colleague because she is not only a scholar with a real PhD from American University in anthropology, who goes and does real field work, but because she still describes herself not only as an anthropologist, but as a youth worker, right? Because she is among those people at Eastern who is interested in the way that what we do as scholars connects with what happens in the real world. And you'll see that today in her presentation, which is entitled Youth, Faith, and Activism in Rio de Janeiro, Reworking Global Identities While Undoing Local Violence. This comes out of her dissertation and sabbatical research, and we're happy to have her this morning. Calenthia.
Always a youth worker first, right? Good morning. All right. I want to talk a little bit about a chapter of my dissertation research that deals with identity, but not just identity as it relates to people, but identity as it relates to space, right? Spaces, these global spaces. That was a large portion of what I did my research on. I connected with youth living in two different favelas in Rio de Janeiro and looked at lots of things, but primarily their lives and how these young people had created alternative spaces for themselves. There are assumptions about what it means to be a favelado, someone who grew up in the favela. And so lots of issues related to poverty and violence, but also race, right, or color, that kind of fuzzy space, if you know anything about Brazil and how they understand race and how Brazil projects itself to the world as a racial democracy. But when you talk to folks on the ground, particularly Afro-Brazilians, you get a completely different story. So I was interested in all those things as an anthropologist and certainly as a youth worker. Let's put this. So that's the gist of what I want to talk about this morning. I met Andre one afternoon when I was strolling through City of God favela, Cidade de Deus. He was sitting near the NGO I had been studying. He had been sitting on the ground near the building in dress clothes, and you just never see that unless it's Sunday and folk are going to church or something like that. But he was sitting there in some nice pair of slacks and shiny shoes, long sleeve shirt in the heat of the day, and a huge black Bible sitting on the sidewalk, very dusty sidewalk in the favela. He was a young man. He looked to be in his mid-20s. And he was, again, just sitting there. He would be, in color, he would be what, because color is a big issue, he would be what Brazilians call mulatto, right? So brown hue, kind of bronzy-like. So he had this large Bible and a huge audio system playing gospel music, right? In the middle of the day, dusty sidewalk, sitting there, playing gospel music. And by the way, I tell this story a lot, so if you've heard me tell it maybe in Anth class or something like that, because it's a story that still sticks with me out of all the research I did and all the young people I talked to. Andre sticks out to me. I call him Andre, that's not his name. So he's sitting there with his huge Bible and his gospel music, and he's looking very pensive and very serious. And so I'm walking with one of my informants, a young girl, about 19 years old, whose English was pretty good, and she was able to help me out a lot. And so I said, who's this guy playing gospel music? What's he doing? And she says, that's Andre. This is what he does every day. He's here. He's talking to kids. He's talking to street kids. He's talking to the young favelados here on the streets. This is what he does. So I said, I want to talk to him. So she took me over and she introduced me to Andre. And he said hello. He said, "I am Andre, and I am a street evangelist." His exact words. "I'm a street evangelist." He said he spent his life, he dedicated his life to traveling around the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, and his goal was to even step outside of Rio and into other parts of Brazil and share the gospel of Jesus Christ with young people. That was his goal. He said he wanted to share the gospel with kids who either did not have a space or a place to call their own, kids who didn't have parents, kids who were just like him, he said, which I thought was fascinating. He went on to ask me if I knew about an event that happened in 1993. And this event, the Candelaria Massacre, anybody heard of it? Okay, great. The Candelaria Massacre happened in 1993, and it's not like it was just a unique event, but it was pivotal in changing some things in Brazil as it related to youth and violence. So he said, did you know about the Candelaria Massacre? And I said, yeah, I do. And he said, well, I'm a survivor of that massacre from 1993. He said he was just about 8 or 9 years old back then, and that at that young age, he had been living on the streets, traveling around as a little street urchin, as they were often called. These kids were quick, by the way. These so-called street urchins, they you're walking down the street with a bag, they fly right by you, grab your bag and keep going, just really quick. He was one of those kids. He spent his young life stealing food. He didn't have a place to live. He didn't have, or at least he didn't live with his parents. And so he spent his life on the street. He hustled, he made money, shining shoes or whatever he needed to do. That was his experience. He said he was one of those kids who was sleeping outside this church in 1993. The massacre was that these, mostly boys usually, but street kids, would all pile up outside this church, right outside the church, every night. It was their place to sleep. That's where they went to bed. The reason they slept there was because it was a safe space. They felt like, if you're going to sleep somewhere, you're pretty vulnerable. They could be protected in that space, but also because the priests at the church would feed them, right? So they'd give them a simple meal, maybe some soup, some bread, after they read them a Bible story. This night, July 23rd, 1993, the boys had, and they probably ranged in age from 6 or 7 to 21, 22. They, about 20 or 30 of them, had they got their Bible study lesson, they got their meal, and they laid on cardboard outside the church to sleep. Some off-duty police, many of them were, not all of them, but quite a few of them were off-duty police, came by, and there were they drove by, and there were some words thrown back and forth between the police and the kids sleeping on the street. And you got to keep in mind, there's so many street kids in Rio at this time that, there were crazy people who would actually go out and shoot kids as a type of population control. There were so many kids without supervision, without parents, that kids were killed. So the police, off-duty police, renegade police, got into this back and forth hollering match with these kids sleeping on the sidewalk. And the next thing you know, gunshots went off. Some of those police officers shot into the crowd of the crowd of sleeping kids, just shot randomly, shot kids sleeping after a meal. Homeless kids shot. Some of the kids were able to run, and we know at least 3 of them, these off-duty cops, had chased them and shot them in the back as they were trying to run away. Andre was in that crowd, and he survived. He wasn't shot. He survived. About 8 boys were killed that night, and others were wounded. Andre survived that massacre, and it went on to change his life. He said that because of that, he said that was kind of a turning point. It took a number of years, but because of that, he changed his life. Now, I didn't get the whole story. What happened? Did you meet somebody who introduced you to Jesus? I didn't get the whole story, but he said because of that, he became a street evangelist, and he wanted to save those same kids because he had been one of them, and that's what he was doing. That's how he spent his life. One of the interesting things about him was that he really stood out. That's why I wanted to talk to him when I was traveling through the favela with my key informant. He really stood out. Something about the way he comported himself said, I'm important, I'm significant. So he had acquired this new social identity. It was distinct, it was different. He was no longer a street urchin. He wasn't a gang member, which was very common for lots of young brown boys in favelas. But he was somebody different. The church had helped him and given him this alternative identity, this alternative value system that really impacted his life. He was different. So this theme of identity and alternative value systems really came up a lot in different ways as I talked to different young people in the favelas. So this chapter of my research looked at this kind of looking for identity, looking for purpose, looking for value, and these alternative value systems. And when you looked at all the kids, even the street urchins, many of them, these little guys, they traveled together in groups. They were their own little gangs, but they got identity from that, right? They developed a type of identity from hanging together and finding joy, I think, in being able to quickly steal people's bags or people's money, looking at tourists on the beach and being able to fly right by them, grab a camera, and keep going. I saw it a lot. So even there was a type of identity there, but again, with Andre and the church, there was this alternative identity and alternative value system. John Burdick, who is an anthropologist and did research on women, race, and popular Christianity in Brazil, writes that religion, as in the case of Andre, religion allows society's outcasts to create new social identities and cultivate a sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. Another anthropologist, Donna Goldstein, whose research was grounded in Rio, adds that religious belonging has become not only an indicator of faith, but also a protective symbol, this is important, a protective symbol of neutrality and non-participation in the escalating violence occurring among police, bandits, and police bandits, as these guys were who shot the kids. The church offers safety, it offers belonging, and a counter-social identity. Church also offers a sense of personal power within otherwise powerless realities. And that was Andre, right? I mean, he clearly had a sense of power and identity about himself. The church, that community, and then certainly Jesus Christ offered him this alternative value system, and it just spoke loudly in his life. However, just like church membership, gang membership also, I'm not on my slides here. By the way, just to go back a little bit, these red images, red paint outside the church are a remembrance of the 8 images of kids on the ground painted there. If you go to Brazil today, you'll see this, is a remembrance of the kids who were killed in the Candelaria massacre. I went to visit, especially after I got Andre's story about being a survivor of that massacre. But however, just like church membership, gang membership also offered identity. I met gang members as well. And the really neat thing was that the NGO I was connected with had a relationship with drug dealers and gang members. Not a relationship that affirmed what they were doing, but a relationship so that if someone like me was coming into the favela, I was safe. There was no problem. As long as people knew that I was connected with KUFA, the NGO I was working with, I was safe, I was fine. I got to the point where I felt more safe inside the favela than I did outside of the favela. And in case I didn't define it, a favela is might be defined as a slum, an impoverished space. I think it translates slum. So something interesting about the connections between the NGO and the favela, and also gang members within the favela. But many gang members existed. They were there. They were on the street, and they also offered an identity, a space of belonging for many of the young people, particularly young males who found identity and purpose here. Again, that's where Andre could have been, but he found an alternative value system, which was quite impressive. Andre chose church. And I would come to find that lots of other young people also chose church. I met Peter, who's another student. I met him in graffiti class. I went to graffiti class to learn how to do graffiti. Peter was about 22. He was also a favelado from the favela. And again, he had this way of dressing. You could always tell they called themselves evangelicals or evangelists. You could always tell they just seemed to dress very well compared to the rest of us. So I met him in class, and he told me he lived there in the favela. And he was an evangelist. And every time I talked to him, each conversation, because I tried to find out about his family, what changed for him, what were turning points. And every time we talked, he would give me a track afterwards in case I didn't get it before. He wasn't convinced that I was already a Christian. I told him, yes, I know Jesus. You know Jesus? Yes, I know Jesus. The next time we meet, you give me a track again. You sure? Are you sure you know Jesus? I was getting a little insecure, like, what am I? But he was very persistent. He was very persistent, and he was very secure in this new faith identity that had shaped for him, again, an alternative value system. A resistance identity. And I'll say something about that in a minute. Besides churches and gangs, many NGOs, the space KUFA, also offered these belonging and an alternative value system. After the Candelaria massacre in 1993, many NGOs began springing up around Brazil. Critical time, the 90s, lots of NGOs. People were flooding money into the country to open up NGOs to help these poor kids who were dying on the streets, these kids who were without parental guidance. So KUFA was one of them, and they started in the 90s as a response to youth violence and a counter space. They're in the favela, right? So they're in a counter space inside a counter space. I'll say more about that in a minute, where arts were used to offer kids alternative purpose and identity, doing excellent work. They started off by using hip hop, but then they expanded to other arts as well. Arts and transformation of young people in their communities in face of global and local stereotypes occur when youth create new stereotypes. So there's this whole creating new stereotypes, disassociating themselves from violence, disassociating themselves from gangs, disassociating themselves from this life of young street urchins. And again, images of criminality. These new images are of youth who are passionately resistant and artistic. Their art is their activism, and I'm going to show you a video in a minute. Music, rap, graffiti, dance, DJing, filmmaking, they had it all at this NGO. But hip hop was central to their programmatic efforts. It was central to countering negative impositions of race and place. Now again, in Brazil, race is this fuzzy thing. And Brazil posits itself as a racial democracy. But these kids I talked to, young Afro-Brazilians on the street, talked about extreme racism in mainstream spaces. Sometimes they felt most safe in the favela, this fringe space, this off-the-grid space. They talked about dealing with race and racism. They talked about being kind of, based on color too, certainly being very, very dark skinned and what that meant and how that impacted their lives, and how they felt shame around that, how they felt shame around their color. Again, these are stories specifically from the young people. And I keep saying that these are stories because whenever I give this talk, there's always somebody who says, no, but Brazil really is a racial democracy. Okay, I'm telling you what Brazilians have told me. right? That racial democracy language is suspect, right? But as it relates to race and place, being a favelado, living in the favela, being black in the favela, the assumption is that there are black people in the favela. The reality is that there are lots of different kinds of people in favela, but favelas are considered black space. That's where all the poor, violent black people live, right? So you got the favela and the favelado, and again, young people creating alternative identities connected to these two realities. So the arts and hip hop carve out alternative space, advocating a mind change, a decentering of the mainstream, and reshaping identity politics around skin color and lived spatial realities. Referring to rappers, scholar Jennifer Roth Gordon writes, they, rappers, recenter the periphery, the edges, as a site of consciousness raising, giving voice to hundreds of favelas, which often remain unnamed on maps and in the Brazilian political agenda. Hip-hop is an identity-making movement that creatively reshapes and reimagines the world around itself. It's an identity-making movement at its best, which is usually outside the US. Hip-hop is an identity-making movement that creatively reshapes and reimagines the world around itself. And an important component of that reimagining is concerned with how favelas and the people who live within them have been constructed, how specific, unflattering identities have been imposed upon the favela and the favelado. I would talk to people on buses when I was in Rio, all kinds of people, and they would often say, once they realized I wasn't Brazilian, because my Portuguese was really kind of jacked up, they would often say, so what are you doing here? And I'd say, I'm doing research in the favela. Some people look at the favela, why there? One person said, that's just a hole of waste. Why would you go to the favela? There's nothing there. I said, oh, there's lots of people there. Good people too, good people. It was interesting, some of the shocking things that people would say to me about favelados and the favela space. And even in my own small, insignificant way, I tried to counter that, right? Favelas are everywhere. More than 600 of them are around Rio alone. But their reputation is constantly being reimagined by its younger inhabitants. Its youth are reimagining and countering these negative images of themselves. They take pride in reworking the idea of favela, in imbuing the favela with new meaning. Yes, this space maybe our roads are crumbling and our houses are makeshift, but this is our space, and we take pride in what it is and in who we are in it. There's a term called favela chic, which is everywhere. People, I even have a T-shirt that says "Proud to be a favelado." I'm not one, but or favela, right? So this favela chic, kind of taking pride in identifying as a person from the favela, as a person who lives in these off-the-grid spaces. In his essay on race and space in North America, in North American rap, Murray Foreman argues that rap tracks or rap music, with their almost obsessive preoccupation with place and locality. If you listen to early rap, I'm sure you do, you will hear a lot about place, location, where I'm from. It's about me, my people, my peeps, and my place, my city, my hood, whatever. Murray Foreman says that this obsessive preoccupation with place and locality are never solely about space and place on the local scale. Rather, they also identify and explore ways in which these spaces and places are made meaningful. Struggles and conflicts, as well as positive, they're never solely about place and space on the local scale. Rather, they identify and explore ways in which these spaces and places are made meaningful. Struggles and conflicts, as well as the positive attachments to place, are all represented in the spatial discourse of rap. It is a complex exploration of local practices and their discursive construction. You gotta write like that when you're writing a PhD, sorry. Slum dwellers and squatters fashion space via images and symbols, altering its original intended uses, conceiving them in new ways. People reside in spaces of imagined meaning made real, kept alive, and accessed by the arts and literature. This transcends and refigures perceptions of space and place by outsiders and power elites, right? The outsiders and the power elites are often the people who seem to keep those negative images of the favela and the favelado out there. Connotations of the favela are disrupted and reconstructed by those who live there. I love that. When reimagined and retold, the favela becomes enshrouded with new meaning as a place of urban beauty, as a place of Black pride, as a place of agency and power, as a place of possibility and fortitude. The favela and the favelado are alive and well and proud of it. Alongside favela space, I'll say more about the identity of the particular favelado, those who live there. While Brazil has consistently upheld itself as a racial democracy, the reality on the ground is quite different. When talking with Afro-Brazilians, many frequently talked about daily racism they encountered being Black in Brazil. A part of affirming identity was learning to affirm one's own Blackness. And you know, I thought it was hard in the United States to get folks to be proud about their own Blackness, like it's okay. It's tough in Brazil. I talked to a little girl, and you know, kids are not guarded often. They say what they say, and she told me that Black was just ugly. Black people, Black anything, just ugly. Okay. So this kind of restructuring identity meant countering these mainstream imposed identity of ugliness and worthlessness about what it meant to be Black. Black was assumed to live in the favela. The favela, again, as I said, is Black space, and both are always associated with negativity, poverty, violence. Countering these stubborn ideas of Black people and Black space, meant flipping the standard script and creating new ones. Hip hop has this kind of in-your-face way of celebrating Black bodies, Black subjectivity. It's really in your face. And Black space as it disrupts oppressive narratives of color, class, and place. In 2007 or so, I don't know if you guys remember Live Earth, when it was everywhere. Well, I went to Live Earth Rio on the beach in Copacabana. I joined people who had gathered on the south zone of Copacabana for this global climate awareness concert. And well-known Brazilian rapper, well-known to many of us, was there. He was the fifth act to perform, and it had to be exciting for him because he was performing on his own turf. He is from Rio. He is a carioca, as they call themselves. And also, but wonderfully, Lenny Kravitz was there. I like him a lot. Macy Gray was there, and Pharrell Williams, amongst others. Bill, being a native of Rio, took the stage with an extra pound of hip-hop swagger, greeting the thousands of people. I mean, the beach was just, people were flowing back and forth. It was incredible on the hot sands. And he started off his rap with these words. And at this point, I had never heard this song before. And I had to pause and say, what is he referring to? But the words start off, and I translate them here for you because when you see them, or when you hear them, it's in Portuguese. He says, he comes to the stage here in Rio for Live Earth, and he says, to all the Afro descendants of Brazil. Who says that? He said, long live the people of the slums. Long live the people of the slums. Long live the people of the world, all people of the world. And then he says again, long live Afro descendants. Zumbi lives, and Zumbi is a historical figure in Afro-Brazilian history. And then he says of himself, I am a product of the ghetto, CDD, Cidade de Deus, City of God. I am a product of the ghetto, CDD, MV Bill. Like, wow. And then he started his rap. An analysis of this rap expresses the ways that young Black favelada dwellers Bill is also from a favela, make meaning around identity and space in hip hop. His words affirm an overwhelming African presence in Brazil. When he says, "Long live all Afro descendants of Brazil," and then he salutes the slum dwellers, that's very intentional. He's doing something teachy here. That's very intentional, right? It's about kind of countering this black identity and black space. It's a form of activism, is how he explained it to me. So Bill gives a nod to favela spaces and favela people, not just black favelados, but all favelados. He gives a nod there, saying, "I see you, and you're good." And then he goes on and he says, "Long live the people of the world, all people of the world." And then he talks about Zumbi, who again is a historical figure. We're going to see this in the video. And then he concludes with a reference of himself being from the ghetto, CDD, Cidade de Deus. By concluding this intro at this concert with a reference to himself and his favela, Bill joins himself in a long history of poor people around the world. From Zumbi to Bill, and from the Quilombo, which is kind of a precursor to favelas, the Quilombo, these slave spaces in colonial Brazil, a bridge from past to present is invoked in this performance. Zumbi lives through Bill, and the Quilombo lives through the favela. It's quite powerful. Together, poor informal spaces around the globe are celebrated in this Live Earth concert with all kinds of people around the world, and it's televised internationally. So he begins his rap with this language about poor people, about spaces that are off the grid, about the favela. He introduces this discursive rendering of hip hop as black identity performance, as activism, as resistance. In this rap, he uses the word "o povo," which in Portuguese is "my people." O povo, the people, my people. But not just, it's not just any people, it's my people, right? He personalizes it. He makes it like family, people who are of these poor spaces around the grid. It is family. So Bill has this way of including a global citizenship of those who are connected to the favela, those who are outcasts, those who are unseen and unheard. He's in this very public space, and he affirms who they are. Bill subverts and inverts the standard narrative of the favela by affirming those informal terrains shaped in a history of oppression, struggle, and resistance. Many Brazilian youth resist and express shame, as I said, around their color or identity, and refuse to or at least seem to be incapable of changing that in many ways, or struggle to change how they view themselves and understand themselves. But then there are others who choose instead to imagine themselves as a part of something bigger, right? Beyond color, beyond the favela, beyond the race, right? So I met kids like that. Sake of time, I'm gonna move ahead a little bit here. When you talk about it, the tricky thing in talking about race, and certainly even space, it's tricky in Brazil because it's un-Brazilian to discuss race in Brazil. Another, again, anthropologist Jennifer Roth Gordon writes that it's considered un-Brazilian to discuss race in Brazil, set within a Brazilian context of racial democracy where any discussion of race has historically been considered un-Brazilian or too American, which is interesting. Rappers there who refuse to accept that, like MV Bill, disrupt the desired silence around these issues of race, often writing lyrics which overtly address race consciousness, racial identity, and racism. Rappers contest the imagination of racial democracy that Brazil holds up by creating these counter-hegemonic narratives subsumed in an alternative black space like the favela. So what we see in all of that is that the church, the NGO, usage of the arts and hip hop help create these alternative value systems. The executive director of KUFA's NGO called hip hop the voice of the periphery. He said that arts in many ways are the voice of the periphery, but specifically hip hop, because it lends itself to this counter narrative. So he said it's the voice of the periphery. It's the voice of all people on the periphery, not just black Brazilians or black people, but poor people everywhere. However, paradoxically, blackness is assumed to belong to the periphery, as I've said. The favela continues to be imagined as black terrain, even though its inhabitants are multicolored. And hip hop has this way of embracing the oppressed of all colors. Some would argue, but that initial embrace is black. So blackness becomes a central rallying point. So identities are shaped, identities are changed via this NGO that I studied and the work that they're doing around the arts with street kids. And they're being quite successful. I mean, they're doing fantastic work. I want to show you this video that it's the video version of the Live Earth song that Bill did. And just to help you to look at it well, the whole video is filmed it's a little grainy, but it's filmed in the favela in Cidade de Deus, City of God. And we'll see the rapper here, Bill, starting off in a classroom. And the video is called Black in Movement or Black in Motion. So we see that he's in the favela, he's in a classroom, and he's sending a message to kids about who they are and who they can be. So we'll have different images around the favela spaces of kids playing, jumping rope, whatever kids are, whatever they do. And then we'll see kind of these colorful sparks, right, of maybe a kid becoming an astronaut or something like that, and how he flies off into space. And then at the end, we see Bill taking a picture of a whole group of smiling young favelados, all black Brazilians. If you take time to interpret what's happening here, the fact that it's filmed in the favela, and the fact that all the smiling faces of the young kids we see are black favelados, but they're not being violent. They're having a good time. They look healthy. They look like they're safe. They look nurtured. Bill is affirming them through his existence. And then this idea that even though you come from the favela, and even though you are a black Brazilian, you can be whoever you want to be in the world. You can do whatever you want to do. The sky's the limits. You can do it. It's my favorite video. People keep asking me, is that old? I think it was done in 2007. It looks, maybe that's old for some of you. The way the film is, you said yes. The way it's put together, it's meant to look a little bit more dated than it is. But again, the words, I should give you that bit at the very beginning when he comes on. He does this little intro sort of thing where he talks, where he greets, he says, hello to all the Afro-Brazilians, hello to all the poor people of the world. This is the favela. I am MV Bill from the ghetto. I am from the ghetto. And then he uses his, the black space or the favela space where he's from, which is Cidade de Deus, CDD. Good morning, bom dia.
Sabe o que é hoje?
It's a special day. Do you know what today is?
Dois, MV.
Guiado por Jesus. 2000000. A voz do excluído tá no ar. Superação, força, luz, união, orgulho. Os representados escolherão seus representantes. Chapa preta. A todos os afrodescendentes do Brasil. Viva o povo das favelas. Viva todos os povos do mundo. Viva a afrodescendência. Viva Zumbi vive. Bruto do gueto. CDD. LVB. Aquele que você viu. Ei, não sou o movimento negro, sou o preto em movimento, todos os lamentos. Sobre a nossa história marcada por glória, sentimento que eu levo no peito da de vitória. Seduzido pela paixão combativa, busquei alternativa. Da minha denúncia sou refém, quem conhece bem, sabe que não tem vitória sem suor. Se liga só, tem que ser 2 vezes melhor, ou vai ficar acumulado sem voz. Sabe que o martelo tem mais peso pra nós, que a gente todo dia anda na mira do gosto. Pura melanina, coloque em minha rima. Peças que dá a volta por cima. O passado em si contamina aqueles que são com uma vida em liberdade. Capacidade pra bater de frente, de modificar o que foi predestinado pra gente dignificar o que foi conquistado. Mudar de estado, sair de baixo, sem esculacho. É o que eu acho. Não me encaixe nos padrões que visam meus irmãos como os vilões. Na condição de culpado, ovelha branca da nação que renegou a prontidão. Tem o poder de mudar, rapaz. Então passe para o lado de cá, vem cá. Outra corrente aqui nos une, a covardia que nos pune. A derrota se esconde no irmão que não se assume. Chora quando é pra sorrir, e na hora de chorar, levanta quando é pra dormir. Dorme na hora de acordar, desperta. Sentindo a atmosfera que libera dos porões, que te liberta. Pra quem vai buscar uma cueca e deixar de ser um qualquer, viu como é? Tento por convicção, nós já vamos subir missão, não. Da ré no músico, eu resto na missão. Tem que ser sangue bom com atitude. Saber que a caminhada é diferente pra quem vem na negritude. Um dia isso mude, por enquanto vou rezar pro santo e que nós nos ajude.
My favorite MV Bill songs. So, in summation, the activism is essentially about teaching young favelados that they are valuable and they have worth, and they're doing tremendous work in making that happen. I'm excited about the future for Brazil, even some things that are going on now, but certainly excited about the future of Brazil and what this next very young generation is doing to change images, to change identity, and to affirm space. Thank you. I'll take any questions if there are any. I think we've got 5 minutes. Yes, Nancy.
I'm sorry if you said this. What is the name of the NGO that you work
CUFA, Centro Unidas das Favelas.
And are they doing a school that Bill was in?
They do have a school. They have, it's more of, it's an off-the-grid kind of school. Should I speak in the mic? Can you hear me? They do have a school, and many people, instead of, college is tricky. You have to, it's free if you pass a test, but a lot of kids don't get in, and so they do have a school of the arts. But also, there's also, within the school, there's also tutoring, because speaking English is a big deal, so classes on how to learning English, but also classes on the arts, which is quite fascinating. It really changes the lives of these young kids. Yeah.
You said there's like hundreds of favelas, right?
And in Rio alone, there's over 600.
Yeah. So some of them probably don't have schools?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. You know, at least around Rio, the state of Rio, because there's a state and then certainly the city, but around Rio, they're doing a lot of cleanup right now because of the World Cup next year, and it's 2016, the Olympics. My people tell me that, you know, some of the public images out there, at least wanting to perceive that everything is safe and good, that I should be a little bit suspect. But, you know, the country wants our dollars. They don't want us to be afraid to go there for the World Cup. So they are doing some cleanup of favelas. Favelas are much more healthy than they used to be. The schools there are schools in favelas, in some of them, and some of them are, most of them are probably problematic. They're not the best schools, to put it nicely. John.
Yeah, what is the position of the church on race, space, place, and what aspects or areas are currently not yet being addressed by either the private sector, the government, or the church?
Yeah. I think it's going to depend on the church, but overall, generally the church is pretty silent. Certainly the Catholic Church, which is still the majority religion in Brazil. And then evangelicalism is growing, Pentecostalism, they call it evangelicalism, but Pentecostalism is growing all over South America. I think you know that. The church is generally silent. And that was actually one of the reasons. There were many reasons why I decided not to do my research on churches. One was, you know, I was, you know, doing a PhD at a secular school. I just didn't feel like that drama, potential drama. But also I was really interested more in, there are black movements. I kind of see some of where they are is where we were in the 60s. But there are black movements in Brazil and some exciting things happening as it relates to that. But I see a lot of this kind of as it relates to race coming out of grassroots people, like people in the favela, who will speak to the issue now. They're no longer afraid. Upper class people generally tend to be a bit more silent, and the church is pretty silent on the issue. Anyone else? Yeah.
Can you, I don't know if you were an object of your analysis, but can you say a little bit about what kind of hip-hop songs, I'm so not it, but...
What kind of what?
What kind of hip-hop the kids produce? I mean...
Brazilian hip-hop?
I mean, specifically, what did the kids... I mean, was it primarily autobiographical, like Andre telling a story, or just...
Right.
Kind of curious.
This is the thing that I really... I mean, because they do like... A lot of kids do like American hip-hop. You know, I go there and like, do you know Mos Def? I'm like, no. You know, you like Beyonce? Yeah. You know. But they like American hip hop, which is problematic. They do like it. But Brazilian hip hop, the reason why I'm just kind of like, wow, at least up till now, I'm not sure what's happening on other levels. They got this other thing called funk, where you find a lot of the, I think, pretty obscene lyrics happening. But hip hop itself is very justice oriented, very much about affirmation and uplifting people, like hip hop started out in the U.S. They're holding to that in Brazil. They really are. As a matter of fact, Snoop Dogg, if you know that American rapper, was supposed to do a concert there. And I know one of the actually president of the NGO he's in Rio, he has all say. And so Snoop Dogg was coming to a concert, and he asked for some Brazilian honeys, women, to be in his room after the show. Well, the music producer did not like that at all. So he shut the whole show down. He said, Snoop, we don't need you. Don't come. Like, yay. Right? So, I mean, they're just doing, I don't know if it'll remain that way, but hip hop, Brazilian hip hop, generally is really very centered on justice, humanity, peace. Bill has this fantastic, what's on a video, well, it is, where he holds up a gun, right? So much gun violence, and he puts it down on a table, and he puts a towel over it, and then he proceeds to go on about why they should put down their arms, why the drug dealers and people who, listen, I saw kids 14, 15 years old with AK-40. I didn't even know what an AK-47 was, but with AK. One favela we went into, just two kids standing there guarding it, guarding the entrance and checking us out and make sure we were okay and we knew the right people before we could go in. They were kids, scary stuff. But Bill's saying, put the arms down, put the weapons down. Yeah, time. Thank you.
Thank you. I think behind the idea of windows on the world is literally to see the world, parts of it, and conditions that we don't see every day. And implicit in that is this idea that human beings have the image of God. And every time that we see another human being in their life and their condition, we see both the beauty of that image and the damage done to it. And so thank you for helping us understand God and each other better. Have a good weekend. Bye.